Welcome to Living Yoga. My name is Darren Main, and in this podcast, I like to talk about all things yoga and wellness and self-improvement. And every once in a while, I have a guest that really inspires me, and I invite them back on. And that is true for today's podcast. We're going to be talking again with Kori Hahn, who is evidently the most prolific writer since J.K. Rowling. She's out with a brand new book called A Temple of Her Own. And we're going to be talking about that in this podcast. Before we get into that, please feel free to drop questions for me or Kori in the comment section of this podcast, wherever you may be watching it. Feel free to follow both of us on social media. And I will put links to both my info and Kori's, as well as her new book, and maybe even her old book in the show notes, so you have everything handy. With that, I'm going to bring in Kori. Hey, Kori.
Hey, thanks for having me. What a great intro.
Yeah, J.K. Rowling, is that you?
Yeah, I'm definitely going to voice note that for my morning meditation, I think, for the next month. Just get on that vibe.
Is your next book about wizards?
It could be, actually.
Yeah, well, it's just something to think about. So I want to dive into your new book. But I just want to let people get a feel for who you are. They may not have seen or listened to our last conversation, or may not be familiar with your work.
Right.
I think of you as the surfer yogi from Sri Lanka. You can put that on your LinkedIn profile if you'd like. But maybe you could flesh that out a little bit.
Well, it's not so far from what I would say also. I live in Bali with my 8-year-old son, and was running yoga and surfing retreats for women for 8 years before COVID, which led me to Sri Lanka. So I renovated a little house there and was going to run my retreats more frequently and have a base for them. And then COVID hit, so I stayed just at my house pretty much alone with my son for a few years. And then that's when I met you, when my first book, Rituals of the Soul, came out. And that was really fun. It was really nice to talk to people after being so isolated. It was like a gift from the universe. And then this time I'm back. We've moved back to Bali, actually. My son and I, and his father, who I'm not with, we have a really good co-parenting situation. And I ended up writing another book, which was about the goddesses, which the Balinese really embody, and they live it in a different way than India. So it was really fun to kind of have these two perspectives of Hinduism, I guess, and to have these examples to write with. And we're really happy in Bali. We're really happy to have moved back. So that's...
You know, every time I talk to you, I'm sort of this smidge envious. I mean, I have a fantastic life here in Berkeley, but Sri Lanka, Bali, surfing, women's retreats. I never get invited to women's retreats. I don't know why. Well, let's dive into your book, because
Okay.
I think it's a really important book. I'm gonna read just a short little snippet, because I think a lot of people, but a lot of women in particular, can identify with this as a jumping off point. And it's one of the things I really like about you and your work is you're very real. I think a lot of times in the yoga world, it's like this flowery spiritual bypass. Let's just pretend all the bad stuff isn't there and it's all good and namaste. And you just seem to lean right into the mess. And then the beauty that arises, that's that saying in Buddhism, out of the mud grows a lotus.
Yeah.
And so this is one short paragraph from the beginning of your book. And again, I could identify with it, and I think most people can. And you write, he broke up with me in an email. An email! After years of togetherness, a child, and having recently relocated to the other side of the Indian Ocean to build a home and a business together, I received an email telling me my family as I knew it was now over. And
Dang. That
um,
sounded bleak. It was
it sounds
bleak.
bleak, but you turn it around. So I'm wondering, that's from the very beginning of your book, a second chapter or something like that, first, second chapter. And I'm wondering, like, you started from this bleak place that I think a lot of people, we've all been dumped. We've all been dumped in horrible ways, and we've all had the plans, I'm married and have a kid and we're going to do all this stuff together, and then it all falls apart right in front of you.
Yeah.
How do we turn that mess into the temple that you're writing about? Take
Well,
that
there's
and run with it.
280 pages telling you about. It's
And I
really that
know, you're going to ask me to be the narrator for the audiobook after that beautiful
you
reading.
could. That would be probably better than me, though. I was even just reading to myself and was stuttering all over. And I'm thinking, this is your 700th time reading. How are you still stuttering? But yeah, I do think this topic is something that most people could relate with. And I guess that's why I was called to write it, because there have been moments recently as I'm publishing something so vulnerable and so raw and going, why did you need to do that? But I guess the real reason was because I think so many people are struggling and don't, it's like almost like you have to be reminded all the time, or remind yourself and change your brain to function that way, to really appreciate everything, especially in those really like bitter moments. Or like, I think a lot of people through COVID too had kind of situations like this where suddenly you're in heartbreak, which is the hardest thing to deal with no idea of what to do, and you can't even go out with your friends or go for a trip to anywhere or do anything, you just sit with it. And it was hard. I think a lot of people had that experience too.
Yeah. Well, talk about how that, just the universe, your ex, like life, throwing you a massive curveball led to, we've talked about the mud.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the lotus.
Yeah, let's talk about the lotus, because let's always talk about the lotus too. Like that's the whole idea really is, okay, so, this is, I think the curveballs show you so clearly what you want the lotus to look like, what color, how it's going to grow, and how much sun, it makes you figure out all those details for the lotus. And so, of course, years after this divorce that obviously my ex wasn't so super happy to read about either, and I was like, God, why did I do that? But it's because I think we both were a bit fooled on how relationships worked, and as far as we both were giving ourselves away instead of being too strongly independent, feeling we're self-worthy, not putting our stuff on each other. Not, I don't want to say healed, because that's really not it, but it's more just at peace and calm, and it took a while. That my temple now is like calm. That if I'm going to have boundaries, which people love to, like focus on, I really had to realize that the boundaries weren't about anybody else. It was about me. What keeps me peaceful and calm. And those are the two things I wanted. But for other people, surely it would be something different, different
Yeah.
moments.
Can I ask you a personal question about that?
Yeah, of course.
We'll go right for the emotional
Let's
jugular
go.
here. No, I'm talking about myself here, and I suspect others. When I have been, say, dumped or fired or otherwise, like the universe or somebody in the universe gives me a really sharp elbow,
Yeah.
um, my first feeling is that of betrayal and hurt and how dare you, and I'm going to blame you for this pain I'm feeling. But then when I do some self-inquiry, I realize that the writing was sort of on the wall, that relationship wasn't what I wanted it to be. And I just didn't have the courage to say something or make a move or do something different.
Yeah.
And so this person who, however, admittedly an email is not the ideal way to ask for divorce,
Yeah.
putting that out there, like, do you have you found that this is an opportunity for you to do that self-reflection, that, well, he certainly could have done stuff differently, maybe you could have too?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think that the reason that we have such a beautiful co-parenting and we're like almost back to being really our closest friends, with a lot of independence and space, but
Yeah.
because we both done that, it's made we both value the peace and the calm. And so it's made it a beautiful. In fact, I couldn't think of like, I don't, yeah, we maybe we weren't ever meant to actually be in a relationship just to co-parent because this is fabulous, like, but it took that. And even he has said to me, I wish I didn't do it that way. I didn't know what else to do. I think all of us in a bad, unhealthy, toxic relation that's triggering our patterns has the capability to be monsters, and then you stay in it because you're attached and this and that, and you can see everyone knows about this, right? And then separating feels like the most painful, dreadful thing, and a lot of ego is involved in it. And but as because it was COVID as well, or that time period when we were doing a lot of solitude and isolation, both of us sat in that and we're able to do our inner work without any distraction. So it's almost like a beautiful opportunity. And there's no judgment on that it was an email. What is the right way to ask for a divorce anyways? Like you're usually at your wits end and in a really stressed out place, and your nervous system is in panic. Like you're not going to do everything ideal. And I think that's where the journey of this book goes too, is just to have so much compassion for all your junk. And then the junk just feels like it's not as much ruling you.
Yeah. Um, so I want to hear more about your book, and feel free to tie this question into your book. But sort of looking at you and your work in the macro, the big picture, I feel like you're a really empowered woman, and you empower other women. I'm sure you empower a lot of men as well, but I feel like you really have done a lot of work on your own empowerment and women. And I think this sort of, and I'm saying this as like a white dude, like I'm prepared for the hate mail. No, I feel like as I've worked with women and specifically like other yoga teachers, female yoga teachers that I see are really empowered, it seems like there's this uh, there's this mislabeling of anger with power.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think this is true for men. I just think it looks a little different for many women. That I'm angry and I'm full of rage, and there is my female power. Whereas I look at someone like you and I see you modeling true power, which is, yes, you feel anger and rage at times, but you move beyond that to something more solid, more authentic. Um, and I see that in your writing and just your general work and the way you hold yourself.
Thank
I'm
you.
wondering if you could reflect on that and tell me if I'm wrong. I'm sure I'll get emails telling me how I'm wrong, but I'm wondering if you could reflect on that and just what girl power looks like or could
God,
look
I
like.
love this. I'm going to add that to the morning meditation also.
Okay.
All these positive, you're like the best hype girl ever. Is that what we say? I don't know. But yes, like hype it up, hype your friends up. I love that. And that feels so good to hear. I do think that I went from a lot of self loathing into really falling in love with my life. And one of the characters in the book is a 60-year-old woman from Canada that I met on a surf trip, but she can't even really surf. But she was out there and we were just having fun. And she just like, got a divorce after 30 years and had four boys that are now adults. And she got divorced because he was an alcoholic and the kids were grown. And she's just living her best life. And so I meet this woman, Tammy, in the book. And she was like a major mentor for me, as well as Sally Kempton, who writes all the information about the goddesses, that I'm referring to often. It's like my Bible, I call it, as far as referencing the Hindu female goddess stories. But she was a huge inspiration and for me stepping it up. And I think that is the thing, is you find the people who are inspiring you and you just let them The only reason you even said like how I'm such a, I shouldn't say gypsy. I think that's like we're not supposed to say that anymore, but wildly moving all over the place, kind of unorthodox, my lifestyle. But anytime we feel envy, it's like almost a spark of inspiration. And I
Yeah.
just think that the women that inspire you, like if even if that's each other or friends that are doing things, stay in those people. Those are your people, especially through a breakup, right? So if you can like replace this partner that's making you feel so unworthy and so unchosen, and you're just not seeing eye to eye, and you can start being around someone who gives you compliments like that, how much better are you going to be doing in general? It's such a huge aspect of our mental health, happiness, and general well-being. But
Yeah.
some people will stay in relationships for ages, and but not about that. Also, just finding new friends and following the inspiration. I think that's the greatest thing.
You've mentioned a few times goddesses, um, and you also mentioned the difference between, or the different approaches to these deities from um, Sri Lanka to Bali and within Hinduism. And of course, Hinduism is sort of like this cobbled together, all these loosely related Vedic traditions. Um, and I'm wondering if you could say how you, because I think different people understand Hindu deities differently. Some people see them as archetypes within themselves, some people see them as actual angelic type deities. And
Yeah.
I'm wondering how you see them and how you see them different from Sri Lanka to maybe mainland India
To Bali.
to Bali, and
Yeah.
how that has changed and shifted in your own journey.
Yeah, absolutely. This is fun. So, after that email, which we opened this session with, I think it was like a few weeks later, and the virus had started in China, so borders were starting to close, but by no means was it like worldwide. It was more just like on a ticker, on the news channels. So I went up to India. And I was like, okay, if I go to the holiest city in all of India and I pray for my husband to come back to me, surely this is going to work. Anyway, so I went there and I started going into all the temples, and I really started going into the goddess temples. And something really, I felt something. I felt a spark, and slowly but surely, somehow I was introduced to these goddesses in my life. And it wasn't something I'd say I was searching for, but it's something that they found me. And after the first one or two, like I found a garden gnome when I went back to Sri Lanka after that week long in India, being slightly introduced to the goddesses. I went home to Sri Lanka and found this huge garden gnome of Kali right after seeing one on the ocean. And I thought, okay, I feel like the universe is trying to tell me to like research Kali. And then right when I did, it's almost like the time when I got that email when I was really in a dark place, drinking tons of wine and eating chocolate and matcha ice cream, like on living off those things, occasional cigarettes, what the real mess looks like. Like that was it.
Yeah.
And,
Maybe you
and
could say who Kali is, just
so,
because Kali's one of those Hindu deities that I think in the West terrifies a lot of people, so they might not
yes,
know a lot about her.
she is
Um,
wild looking, and she symbolizes childbirth. And she has a red tongue, black skin, and a chain made of skulls. And essentially, though, her point is she is pain in a picture. She is pained. She has hurt. And so when I really got to know Kali through that time, and as the borders started locking down and we started entering that period of deep solitude and isolation, essentially in Sri Lanka, we were on house arrest for like, 6 months or something. We couldn't leave our garden besides once every 10 days to go shop. And Kali, as a garden gnome, literally, I would walk outside and be reminded there's a purpose to your pain. That was her message to me. And then, I met Saraswati. There was this another kind of occasional serendipitous bumping in with her. And then Saraswati seemed to send me a message in a way that, like, oh, when you do art and music and creativity, your pain can leave you in a sense. It's like you're helping it escape you because you're singing and writing about these things. And then when I thought of Durga, and Durga has like the 8 arms, and I thought, oh, if I just put what I'm strong for in each of these arms, I am so strong. And I just forgot, and so Durga's like, you are strong. Let's not forget it. You do all these things. You write books. You're a single mom. You're renovating a house. You're flying all over the world. You're also broke, like you're doing all these things. You are amazing. And Durga it's almost like in the book, I journey through all of their temples with the lessons I needed to learn. Like I needed to
Yeah.
remember when coming out of that, candy strewn, snot covered t-shirt land of Kali, and moved into Saraswati, who's floating and playing instruments. So I started learning the sitar. And that's
Yeah.
why the cover of the book is actually like a woman with a sitar and a flower head, because it really,
That is great product placement, I have to say. Your
I nailed
publicist would
that.
be so proud of you.
Yeah. But it's and even this is like a young Indian girl who I met along the way on Instagram, and the whole thing just felt like, yeah, I suddenly was introduced to each of the goddesses, and I just love stories. So I read their story and I said, what would they be trying to tell me with this? And I remember at the beginning of this, you also said something about like the book is almost like an entryway for people, and I definitely feel that way with this book for females and sacred feminism, because when we look at all these ancient, religions and ways of connecting with the spiritual or the conscious or whatever you want to say, I don't know. It was very masculine for a long time. And these stories are really kind of the oldest texts that speak to women, I'd say. Even
Yeah.
the Buddha left his wife and kid, back in Nepal, right, to go sit under a tree for 13 years. I mean, if we put that into a modern context, it's just like, so where's the story of the single mom that had Buddha's kid? Like, we don't hear anything about that. And I just feel like these goddess stories were the first that they were like, okay, for you that are definitely going to stay taking care of the child. And these are just old traditional roles. You know what I mean? It's not like everybody has as
Hmm.
much equality or, masculine and feminine mixes today, but back then there were definitely roles that the women seemed to take on more often. And
Well, I think the Hindu goddesses, and I'm far from an expert in this, or just the Hindu deities in general, but the goddesses in particular really lay out a map for healthy psychology.
yeah,
Sort of like, have you seen the movie
yes,
Inside Out?
yes. Oh my God, is it the best? It is the
Yeah.
best.
Well, if you think of like the different emotions and the different, that live inside this girl's head as being the different deities, I mean,
Yes.
sometimes you need to be Kali and rage and dance in a graveyard with the
Oh my
skulls around your
God.
neck, and sometimes you need to be floating on a lotus playing the sitar, and it's all part of you. And a
Yes.
healthy, integrated human being is integrates all parts of themselves, not just the pretty
Yes.
parts.
Yes.
Um,
Nostalgia.
yeah,
Yeah. I loved that movie. And I was like, this is actually amazing for anyone into good mental health and understanding emotions and emotional health.
yeah,
And yeah, it's really, I love that you picked that movie of all, but you're absolutely right. And these are things to remember when you're in those emotions or when those emotions are high. Like in childbirth, there's a reason to be screaming profanities. It's
yeah,
okay. Like, let it out.
yeah.
So, yeah,
And I think that this is just my take on this. I think that when we allow for that, when we create a container for that, it is less likely to come out in ways that are truly hurtful and destructive. In other words,
yeah,
if I can let myself be angry and not keep it bottled up, it's less likely to come out as
yeah,
I don't know, road rage.
of course.
you
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
Um, well, I'm wondering if we have a few minutes left.
Okay.
I'm wondering if you could share one story from your book that is particularly meaningful to you, or maybe that was particularly hard for you to put. I know when I write, sometimes I'm writing and I'll be like, do I really want to share this?
I
Do I
mean, there was
really
so
want the world
much.
to know this about
I
me?
know.
I'm wondering if there's something from your new book that I don't know speaks to that.
Yes, but I do want to ask you, how did you deal with that being so vulnerable in your book and putting it out there? Now it's been some years, I guess, right? So,
Yeah.
um,
Well, sometimes it's like you know that saying, "Sunlight is the best disinfectant." Um,
yes.
now I read my urban mystic book, which is up like 25 years old, 24
Oh
years
my
old, something
God,
like
no
that. It's been
way.
around forever, and I have other books too. But some of the stuff I wrote that I was really nervous about writing, now I'm just like, what was I so nervous about?
Yeah.
You know, and that happened pretty quick. Do you know Les Leventhal?
Yeah.
I interviewed him and I wrote the foreword to it. He wrote a book about his transition from being a gay sex worker and porn star to this world renowned yoga teacher. And
Wow.
just the cover of the book, it reads like, you know, like what most people would call scandal. And I remember him saying, I just wanted to put it out there. I don't need to feel shame. This is about me growing into who I am. He put it more beautifully than I ever could. But I share that feeling like when I put my work out there, when it's scary, but if I do it in a mindful way, not just like, "Hi world, you're my therapy session," but
Yeah.
just like really
Yes.
thoughtfully put it out there.
Which is
Um,
what I feel like this
it's
is sometimes too.
I
Like,
don't feel that at all. I feel
okay.
like it's like, you know, in the 12 steps it says share your experience, strength, and hope.
Yeah.
um, because that experience, strength, and hope. There's some person out there, perhaps a woman, who just got an email from her ex, now ex, is going, "Oh my God, my life is over. It's all done. I like,
Yes.
why get out of bed?"
No, of course.
And
Yeah.
they get to read that, and they get to see how you did this beautiful alchemy of transitioning from probably one of the worst days in your life,
Yeah.
you know,
That is the
to
journey it
living an
takes.
exceptional life.
And I love that. I love that. And you know what? But the one thing, I have my moments that I'm still, because it's just released. So I'm still a little bit, there's moments of like, oh, but for the most part, I know and I believe that I am de-shaming everything. And I'm like, have this fresh line in the sand also, as far as like, even like Taylor Swift, like, oh, that's one of my favorite. Like along this journey, somehow I became a Swiftie, which is like absolutely mind blowing. But I was like, this talk about inspiring empowered women. I mean, I was like,
Yeah.
okay, let's just put the bar up there. I mean, not to expect that from myself, but let's be inspired by that. Like, how's Taylor Swift waking up every day, getting her job done, you know? And I'm like, she's probably not, I don't know,
Yeah.
watching Netflix, you know, like, and to inspire my life through that. And,
Yeah.
yeah, on her last album, she said something, I was trying to find it really quickly, but like that the story has been told and it's done, and let the love be the ink on the page, you know, and just here's a
Yeah.
memoir of this moment in my life. And I think that something is really de-shaming and freeing. And what do we want more than to feel free?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the reasons Taylor Swift is incredibly successful is because she is so honest. Like
Yeah,
her music is very raw and honest.
that's
And I
right.
think people are craving that.
Yeah,
Um, she's a good person from what I can tell. I mean, we're best friends. We sit up at
us
night
too.
and Zoom with each other and talk about boys. Um, uh, but no, she seems really raw and honest and fearless. Have you seen Madonna's Woman of the Year speech?
Yes,
That I just went to see Madonna in concert because I've been a fan of hers since I was a young gay man coming out, and she was like this very
it,
prominent person saying, "Not
yeah,
only is it okay, but I'm going to celebrate you." Um,
yes.
but that fearlessness that certain people, particularly women, have is I don't know, pretty awesome.
Yeah, you can take that and fuel yourself up with it, I feel like. I mean, I'm not going to lie how many times I have like Beyonce walked through my living room to Reputation being like, let's do this. Let's go, you know?
Yeah.
That is my yoga practice now. That's what 43 looks like for me. It's a lot of Adele and it's a
Putting
lot
on
of,
some Taylor Swift, pretending you're, 14
yeah,
years old and
flip the superpower button on though, like I was just like, don't sit here
yeah,
and cry about this. Let's flip whatever we want to do on and go
yeah.
for it. And it's exciting to see other people doing it, living something of meaning that means something and loving their life, just.
Well, I'm going to just say that I think Taylor Swift is going to listen to this podcast. She's going to be so inspired by you that she's going to hire you to be her own private yoga instructor.
Oh, that sounds
I'm
good.
just putting that out there into the universe.
I could just pet the cats too.
I'm sure Taylor Swift is an avid listener of this podcast.
I'm sure she is too.
So,
Okay.
Kori Hahn, A Temple of Her Own is the book. I will put links to everything in the show notes, my work,
Thank
your
you.
work, and especially your new book. Do you have anything else you want to say before we wrap?
No, just for possibly someone's joining because they already read the book, and there are additional resources on my website. So if you get in and you want to, it's really more of an applied yoga book. So there are resources and practices, but they're not in the book. It's more of a story page turner. So that's,
Yeah.
if someone would like additional stuff, yeah, go to my website for anything. So thank you so much for having me and sharing this.
Yeah, I will say this as like a endorsement of sorts. For people who have read my book or any of my books, but especially my Urban Mystic book, very different theme and focus than yours, but similar approach of sharing stories and sharing real world experiences. Some of them are messy, some of them are beautiful, all of them are, transformative. So if you like, for those of you who are familiar with my work, if you like my work, you're going to love Kori's work. Just putting
Oh,
that out there.
I love that.
It's like my work, only really good writing.
Oh God, please. You were actually on my first book proposal. You were one of my comparative lit books.
Ah,
Yeah.
nice.
So I
And
love
they
that.
didn't, and they actually responded to you,
And I
huh?
got a publisher. Yeah. That actually, and an agent. So
Oh,
you were like
nice.
good omen long before we even met. I was like, oh my God, this is crazy when we had our first chat. Like a hero, you were on my book proposal. Anyways, yes, thank you. So good.
I will see you soon, Kori, because
I
I
hope
want to
so.
have you back on. I'm thinking about doing some live streams.
Yeah.
And I thought you would be a fun person. And I've thought about doing some panel discussions, like bringing in a couple of yoga teachers
Sweet.
or authors to talk about whatever the topic of the day happens to be.
Yeah.
And just, we all have our different perspective, and you're on my short list for that too.
Nice. Great. Keep me there.
Awesome.
I'm open. I love it. So good to catch up.
Yeah. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next episode.